Welcome to Capital Outsider, a show about people and ideas outside the halls of power, exploring alternatives to conventional political wisdom.
Welcome to Capital Outsider. I'm your host, Eric Sundwall. Tonight we have kind of a different episode or a different type of Capital Outsider. Joining me in the studio is Brian Beckman.
Hey, Eric.
Welcome, Brian. Now, Brian is unique in terms of our guests in that he's not an activist. He's not a candidate for office. You're not a writer, to my knowledge, and you're not an artist, but you do fit under the aegis of what we're calling Joe Outsider, kind of your average guy on the street. And what we're doing is we're offering people in our audience or viewers the opportunity to come and speak your mind and say your piece. And so that's why we have you in here, Brian. Thank you.
Great to be here.
Now, to be fair, Brian and I have known each other probably for well over 20 years, but I've always known him to be of interesting sorts and characters. And obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world right now, and I guess I'll let you start with what's on your mind.
Well, the big thing obviously is the primary races and who will be selected for us to vote.
Now, as we tape this, it's February 28th, and really there's no options left on the Republican side.
Right.
And
John
assuming
McCain is basically the default candidate, and Obama is on the rise, depending on what happens in Ohio and Texas.
No, I take it you have no sympathy or concern or regard for us poor third-party folk?
I do, but I have to say, it's good for libertarians everywhere that Hillary will not be our next president.
Maybe not necessarily New Yorkers, though, right? I thought we were going to be rid of her at this point, and
right.
She was on her way to bigger and better things.
Right, now she will be our senator in perpetuity.
Now, have you been following this whole process through the entire year, or what's your level of connectedness when you talk about this? I mean, it's at every kitchen table, every water cooler.
Right. Well, it's certainly, I'm no political scientist, but it's a frequent conversation at work. I work as a security officer, and because I have some more liberal views than some of my coworkers, I'm branded the token liberal. And we have talked a little bit. Some of them are even afraid to look into libertarianism. The word scares them.
Well, now, when you call yourself a liberal, what do you mean by that?
Well, I don't necessarily call myself
Well, okay.
anything,
Well, what do they mean when they call you that?
It all started off with my disgust with George Bush in his first election and in the second election, and his rush to war with Iraq, not finishing the job in Afghanistan. And those conversations led them to label me the MoveOn.org guy because I didn't like their commander-in-chief.
Well, I mean, how do you deal with that, though? I mean, what do you say? Do they just kind of shrug and say, yeah, whatever? Or
no, I generally just say that disagreeing with the president doesn't necessarily make you liberal, and point out that my liberal friends think I'm a little on the conservative side, and my conservative friends think I'm a little on the liberal side.
So, really, where are you then?
It all depends on what we're talking about. I like...
Take something odd like immigration.
Immigration, I don't see the need to hire tens of thousands of customs officials to round up illegals and deport them. But, it's an important function of the federal government. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a federal government to secure the borders.
Would that be so bad?
What, not having a federal government?
Yeah, you have a free, peaceful, open society with no government telling us what to do all the time.
I mean, some federal bureaucracy is not a bad way to manage things. It's a big border. It makes trade amongst the states easier.
Do you talk about this? Which border do you talk about?
Well, the most popular, of course, is the Mexican border. The Canadian border doesn't get people all that excited. Although,
why does the Mexican border get them all so excited?
Because it's Mexicans.
Do you think it's like a xenophobia?
It's a xenophobia.
Half racist.
It's the easy one to point out. I think that it's easy to get excited. It's easy to get people excited. So I think that that's on the news. That's the images that you see are the people streaming across the southern border. You would have to engage people in a different conversation to talk about people sneaking in from the Canadian border, terrorists, whoever might be coming in unabated, or the necessary.
So when you look at the presidential candidates and aside from all of the excitement of whatever's left in the primary, if you had to look back at, even the major party candidates, do you see a candidate that you agreed with or were on the level with in terms of just the issue of immigration? Or
I rarely find a candidate that I can agree with on a very broad spectrum. And for me, it generally comes down to, do I think the candidate is capable of making reasonable decisions, and not. And my personal opinion is that the two apparent de facto candidates seem to be more reasonable than what we've had.
John McCain, we're going to spend 100 years in Iraq. That's
he has become increasingly less reasonable. I thought he was the right candidate for that party in 2000.
Now, are you enrolled in a party?
I'm enrolled.
Did you participate in it?
Yes.
Did you participate in the primary process?
I did. I live in the city of Albany. I once was a registered independent. And I switched to a Democratic Party, and not.
Did your taxes go down subsequently?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't a cynical tax move, but it does. It involves you, because all local politics in Albany are Democratic. It involves you on the local level. People will come to your door and talk to you and ask you questions about what's going on, because you're a registered Democrat and you go out to the primaries.
Now, and describe exactly where you live in Albany. It's in the proximity of the capital, correct?
Yeah, it's right down in the heart of things.
So you do get a lot of political involvement and people coming in asking you for their support, or
we get a lot of you get all of the the city council seats that people like to come through. Local congressional districts, people will come through. State congressional districts, people will come through. And usually, it's just your ward leader coming through and reminding you that there's a primary coming up. It gives you an opportunity to see the people in your neighborhood that are involved in.
Do you ever have a Republican come by?
I have never seen a Republican canvass in the city of Albany. Not certainly down in my neighborhood.
Right. And now, if you were, let's say you were to become an activist or a writer or something along those lines, do you have a pet idea or project that you would focus on, or what do you it's a drug war, or the American Gulag, if you will?
Oh, well, yeah. You could. I could talk volumes about my feelings on the drug war, but it's.
We've got about 20 minutes.
Okay. It's terribly reminiscent of Prohibition. Anytime you introduce something that people are going to want to do, regardless of the merits, you take away any discussion of the merits of the use of marijuana or other illicit drugs, and say, if people are going to do this, if they have ready access to it, does it make sense to introduce a black market?
What makes a drug illicit?
Well, I think that you could look at the destructive nature of methamphetamine, heroin, concentrated forms of cocaine.
So you think there's good reason to keep those illegal?
I think there's good reason to have, some kind of control.
But if I want to drink Clorox, that's okay.
The other thing is you're not. The interesting thing to be on a libertarian show is that for me there's no such thing. Political parties, and any of them have an ideology, and there are varying degrees. Ron Paul is described as a libertarian, and I imagine it makes some people shudder, and others not. So I'm not a purist in any way.
I take it you're not a Paululin or a Paultard
or
one of those horrible things that have been said about the poor people who took up with Mr. Paul or Dr. Paul.
Right.
He really wasn't such an unreasonable fellow in terms of the war and issues like that.
Right. And some of that is, I think is the effect of not being prepared for instant national notoriety. I mean, if you're saying things, you're a state level politician. Nobody really knows who you are, and then all of a sudden you're thrust on the national stage, and people are portraying you. They couch you in a certain way.
All right, so
very
let's
few
throw this-
people could withstand.
Let's throw
that.
this on. Let's throw this back to Barack then, right? I mean, what's going to happen here if he's the nominee?
If he's the nominee, well, it's interesting because people are still frightened. I think people are still even as
Because he's a liberal Democrat that's going to socialize medicine and ruin education. Is that why they're frightened?
No, they're frightened because his name is Barack Hussein Obama, and he went to a madrasas. And
Is that true though? I mean, where do you see that? Do you see that bubble up in your everyday conversations with people, or are you just kind of getting a general sense?
Oh
of
no,
the media?
I think that the type of even moderate Republicans that voted for Bush that might not have liked his entire platform, but that were afraid with concern to radical Islam are frightened to vote.
Guys like Mitt Romney talking about the caliphate that's about to reach
right.
our shores.
Right. There's a lot of frenzy. People are, and it happens. It happens throughout history where we're convinced that.
But the reality is he's going to take the oath of office. He's
Right.
either going to have a Congress or a Senate that's with him or against him. And I'm guessing if he wins...
Right. No, I can't imagine him being this great Islamic boogeyman that snuck into, his father didn't come here from Kenya to impregnate a woman to brainwash this isn't the Manchurian candidate. This is, this is a guy that wants to serve his country and is attempting, in my opinion, to be as reasonable as possible.
And
has a history of being reasonable.
And it seems to be we're in a situation where it's almost split right down the middle between Barack and Senator Clinton. And we had a roundtable sometime back in December on Capital Outsider, and we were all predicting that Mrs. Clinton was going to be the nominee without reservation.
Right. She was a juggernaut. She had the money. She had the support. She had the whole Clinton mystique. But I just don't. I never thought that she was a great idea for a candidate.
Well, she has a lot of negatives that pop up, but
Right.
still, you talk about the Clinton machine and
Absolutely.
your average.
And-
I don't want to say garden variety liberal because I don't want to attack people on any level on those regards.
Right.
But it's somewhat true.
Right. But she. I just don't think that she doesn't have quite the same charm that her husband had. I think she might even have more substance, but she doesn't have the charm, and that goes a long way.
Well, but she's also got the mystique of being possibly the first woman elected president. But of course, that's counterset against the fact that Barack Obama could be the first African American elected president too.
And while both of those I think are interesting, and it makes for an interesting conversation to talk about, a country with the ideals of freedom, and et cetera, to have the first, but it's not a good reason to pick a candidate to vote for. If I thought that McCain was going to be the better candidate, I would vote for McCain. I wouldn't vote for history. And, you wouldn't. I personally wouldn't. I would love to see, the country mature to the point where they're not afraid to be led by a woman, where they're not afraid to be led by a black man, but not just to prove that point.
Right. But you've pretty much reconciled or left it to the gods, if you will, that it's going to be red or blue.
Well,
and then that's how you vote.
No, I don't like to vote that. In fact, it's always difficult for me to vote for president in New York State.
Because it's going to go Democrat.
Right.
Reagan was the last one to win it in '84,
right?
When he trounced Mondale, right? That was about it.
And so my vote is pretty much guaranteed to go for the Democratic candidate, regardless of who that is.
What about Ralph?
I don't know what effect the sleeper. They're talking about.
Any sympathy for him?
Sure. I think that a guy that uses his position to try and put out that there should be more than two options and be the whipping boy. It was all his fault that we got George Bush for 8 years, right? It was all Ralph Nader's fault.
Well, of course, Ralph Nader doesn't say that,
right?
And he doesn't believe that. And he makes a pretty persuasive case that wasn't in fact the case. There was a lot of stupid votes that went down for Buchanan just based on those horrible butterfly ballots.
Right. The bad balloting, but it's also not a reason to not run on your convictions. if you have convictions that tell you that you should run for national office because you don't like the things about the electoral system, you don't like the way that corporations are handled in this, you have to go.
Now, if you said that about you or I have to think that our candidacy wouldn't be treated the same.
Right. We don't
as
have
Ralph Nader.
Right. We don't have the same cachet as a Ralph Nader. We don't have national recognition. We don't have money of our own or people that will give us money. We're not the head of a major national organization.
The closest I probably came was picking up an old Corvair. I would have given it a shot and taken my chances with the Corvair, but
right. But you've had some success as a candidate as well. In that,
it depends on how you view success, I guess.
In terms of the difficulty of mounting a third-party candidacy at any level, getting recognition and respect, and saying, I'm going to do this in spite of what the odds say, because it needs to be done.
Sure, I'm always going to be in it for the fight. Winning would be almost a troublesome thing for me if that were to occur.
Right.
I'd have to figure out what to do and go to Washington and all that stuff. And that, right. My wife. She'd say, "Good luck with that."
Right. And and Nader, I think, was lambasted for mostly for saying, "Oh well, the differences are going to be negligible. The difference between George Bush and cousin it there, the vice president that you got to help me with the name. You're the fact checker.
Cheney?
No, Clinton's. His in 2000.
Al Gore.
Oh,
sure.
Sorry
okay.
for that.
No worries. That's fortunately, this is Capital Outsider. You're Joe Outsider, and
right?
The expectation for you is not that the candidate or the activist. You're going to be okay.
But that was the big hit on Nader, right? That he said he went out and mounted his campaign anyway, and then said, well, the difference is going to be negligible, and people feel, for obvious reasons, because primarily of the war in Iraq, that the difference is astronomical.
Our very
Court
own
is very different. The
Alan
war
Chartock locally would probably take that banner and run with it.
Right.
Of course, he never seems to ever mention the fact that Al couldn't win his own home state.
Right.
And if he won his own home state, maybe
right.
we wouldn't be in Iraq
if he had run a better campaign, he would have been.
Now we've touched on this issue a number of times on a number of different shows. Is this, for lack of a better term, Iraq?
Right.
What adjective would you apply to Iraq, or what numerous adjectives?
It's a war of acquisition.
Now, you believe that it was just strictly for the oil, and that there was no security interests or concerns involved with it?
If there were security interests involved in it, they were fooling themselves. To think that they could leave an area where they had their forces amassed, going after the person that everybody was ready to go and get. They wanted to go and get, they wanted to get Osama. We got to get him. We're going to go in there and get him. And
into Iraq?
Into Afghanistan, and then they all of a sudden left Iraq. I just can't believe that they felt that the threat was that severe. That we had been attacked by a group that had been given, harbor in Nation A, and turned our back on that to fight a perceived threat from Nation B.
In a certain extent, we grew up, or started to grow up, at the very last part of the Vietnam War. And what I'm experiencing, or I'm feeling, is some of the frustration that some of the people in that generation who are vocal against that particular war,
right.
There's a great deal of frustration. There's so much politics involved with this type of thing. The George McGovern candidacy in '72 kind of led to away from some of the assumptions of that war. Is there is Obama going to get us out of there, do you think? Or what's your sense of any of that stuff?
I don't know. I know that, what he has said in speeches and what I have read suggests that he is not anti-war and that he's afraid to use the military. He's not a peacenik necessarily, but he was opposed to this particular. But I don't know what do you do? I wish that I had if I had some
of Iraq?
Yeah, you're there. You've gone in.
You want the libertarian answer?
Yes.
No, we're turning the tables here. I'm not used to that from a guest. As a small L libertarian, the idea of initiating force against anybody is always wrong in terms of your political needs or wants or things along those lines. As a big L libertarian, it wasn't my party that got us in there, right? And I think there's a common sentiment amongst people who feel that just because we're stuck with these two parties and their wanton policies, that we somehow have a responsibility as a nation. And to me, if the Greens and the Libertarians were somehow to be able to magically march into Congress and the White House and say, we're out of there,
right?
I think the military is going to do just a fine job in terms of being able to CYA,
right?
And they'll be fine, and it'll be okay in terms of that kind of withdrawal. Now, certainly, the Richard Holbrooks of the world and the Madeleine Albrights are going to and take your right-wing versions of those people.
Right.
They're going to howl and go, "Oh my gosh, there's going to be chaos,
right?
Blood in the streets."
Right. We started it. We have to finish it.
Yeah, and that would be.
Well, I guess that's the question. Then, what do you do as and I'll say as a man, because it looks like the two candidates at this point will be, one of them, whoever wins, will be a man if Hillary is in fact squashed here. You're elected president on some slim majority, which is going to be maybe it's a landslide. Maybe everybody is so fed up that they go and they vote against Republican. But based on the last two elections, it's a bifurcated electorate. You've got 49, 51, 51, 49, however you split it up.
On the popular vote, but there's this whole electoral college magic. That
right, exactly. Right? But what do you do if you want to, you want to consider yourself to be, you want to represent all of the people in the country, and not everybody is going to support a wholesale withdrawal.
Are you asking me if I walked in the White House? If that were the case, I'd say, geez, did Congress declare this war? No, I guess I'm commander-in-chief, come on home, right? I mean, to me, it would be as simple as that.
Right.
I realize that other people are going to howl and go crazy if you start talking like that. You're just crazy. Responsible. It's wrong.
Yeah, and you're a cut-and-run liberal. I mean, and you were if you were opposed to the war, you were a lily-livered liberal.
And I always find that to be kind of funny because I'm the first guy up in the hills the minute they start marching up the Hudson. Right. I'll go.
Right.
Me and the family are gone. We're not going to be occupied or whatever. But
right.
I mean, the reality is that we're not going to be occupied.
Right. We're not going to. Right. The Red Dawn was a fun movie, but it's not going to happen.
I mean,
right.
Crazy.
Right. You're going to
can't be there. Thousands of nuclear missiles at our disposal. We have problems with. Maybe call it climate disruption, climate change. Water's going to be a huge issue. It seems to me that we have so many really big human problems that we're dealing with, and we're still kind of stuck in this almost Cold War mentality.
Right.
Well, yesterday, William F. Buckley died, of course, so that might be
well, the big interesting thing, and I think about this a lot, is what will the effect of climate change have if you're having massive tsunamis, you're having, odd droughts, floods, you're having things
will that in itself change the climate beyond whatever we may be doing to it?
No, what will it do to the political climate, the endless rush to warfare, the engaging in warfare to boost your economy, engaging in warfare to hold on to dwindling resources, et cetera, when you have, if 100 million people are wiped out by some freak act of nature, which is not inconceivable, right? The planet and the solar system have power beyond that which we can imagine coming out of.
I often think sometimes if we had an angry sun all of a sudden and it just
just burped a little,
that could be it for us, right?
Right.
Fred Thompson got grailed or run over the grail, if you will, when he mentioned that both Mars and Venus were getting hotter. Also,
right. Well, yeah, there's dogmatism everywhere. There's dogmatism in science and religion and politics.
Obviously, climate change or global warming is another one of those things that we could talk endlessly about. And believe it or not, our time is coming to a close. Yeah. I guess when you look at it, it's just if you are the average Joe or the average guy, what's your concern or what's your thoughts about like your family and those types of things when you're Just living day to day.
Oh, just living to, I don't get too worked up on what's happening on a national or international scene in terms of my day to day. I like to.
But you see it, you consume it. It goes through your head process. When you lay down at the end of the day, what are you worried about? We're not going to solve these problems.
Exactly. What I'm worried about is, how am I going to continue to be able to pay my mortgage, maintain the house that my children were born and raised in? Am I going to, how's my health? How's my children's health? Are they doing well in school? Have I set them up to be successful as adults? Have I done my job as a parent to make sure that they can handle the rigors of the adult world when they finally leave the nest? Those are my primary concerns.
This types of things just kind of cocktail talk.
It's interesting to talk about. I think it's important to be engaged in, but ultimately,
there's still, when you talk about the political process, and you're looking at a situation in that 21st congressional district where the Clintonite kind of is going to walk in and take that.
Right, exactly. No, the electoral process is just offensive.
Do you ever try to think about going out and changing or affecting that at all?
Well, I don't know. I'm not a big active, or haven't been a big activist type, but I do. To me, I like to engage in these kind of conversations.
And I think that's kind of the purpose of this, is that you as the common or the Joe average or the Joe outsider, we all are caring, intelligent human beings who don't necessarily have any hold on the levers of power or anything like that, but we're not.
Right.
We're not at all lacking in terms of our desire for change or difference.
Right. And I like to point out in every political conversation that I have, in particular leading up to a presidential election, that unless you voted for the candidate of choice in the Democratic Party in New York State, your vote really does. Not that means don't go out, because you got to go out and sign your voter registration card. You should do that. It's protect your right to be engaged in the process, but it just doesn't matter, and that has to change. You can't, and your vote can be stolen from you, like you said. With the superdelegate could go and vote for what the party's interests are, or the local machine's interests are. That may not be yours.
Well, we've got, believe it or not, we're down to about 1 minute left in the show. If there's any parting shot for the world or your friends and family that you want to engage or do at this point, by all means. As our first Joe Outsider guest, I'm going to present you with a Capital Outsider hat, that every average Joe should appreciate and like, and we'll let you close out here.
Well, I'll absolutely cherish this more than like a Car Talk mug or some such. And,
I hope you wear it too.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I'll wear it with pride, and I have been telling everybody to check you guys out on the web, in particular. People that I know that are more moderate Republicans, I tell them we should take a look at the Libertarian Party.
It's not just the Libertarian Party per se, but the Libertarian attitude, if
right,
you will.
Right. The ideal.
And by all means, send them our way. We want to. Right. We're willing to take a chance with the average Joe, if you will. So
low taxes, good borders.
That's right. Again, Bri-Guy, thanks for coming on the
show. Thanks
for
having me, Eric.
This has been Capital Outsider. I'm Eric Sundwall, and this has been our special segment, Joe Outsider. Thanks for watching.